Graphical user interfaces, GUIs, are an amazing tool that we use all the time, including the amazing graphical user interface that's part of the vSphere web client. So my hat is off formally to all those individuals who are involved in user experience research and development to make sure that graphical user interfaces are convenient and functional and they're easy for the user to use. That's great. However, sometimes, whether due to a problem or getting right to the heart of a matter, we might need to use the command line interface to work with a vCenter server appliance or an ESXi host without a GUI. And the ESXi host has a shell that we can get a command line interface at, but we have to enable it. So we'd first of all enable the shell on the host where we do want a command line interface. And in addition, if we want to be able to sit on our management computer right here and do a remote SSH to an ESXi host, we'd also need to, secondly, enable SSH. And once we do get to an ESXi shell, whether we're directly at the ESXi host or we're SSH'd in, what can we do there? Well, there's a lot of our Linux commands that are still going to work, like pwd and cd and ls, and commands like passwd, which in a Linux world is how you change a password with the passwd command. And in addition to many of our traditional Linux commands, we also have some other sets of VMware-specific commands. For example, on the VMware side, we have a command of ESXi, and then after that, we can specify a namespace. I'll walk you through several examples. Some of the namespaces would be like storage, network, software, and then there's additional options that we can add afterwards. So on the VMware side, we have the ESX CLI command. And from here, we can view information, set information, do updates and upgrades by using ESX CLI followed by the appropriate commands. And there's also some backward support for an older command that begins with ESX CFG. The intention is that even with 6.5, there's still backwards compatibility for those commands. But most of the time, for VMware specific commands, we're going to be using ESX CLI followed by the parameters for that command. So instead of starting here at our Windows management computer, let's go to the actual console of ESXi2 to enable shell access on ESXi2 and also to enable SSH. So in the lab controls, we'll go ahead and click on the icon over on the right for ESXi2. So here at ESXi2, we'll click here in this space to let it know we're talking to it, and we'll press F2 to log in. It's asking us for the password for root, so I'll hit the down arrow and we'll supply that password, which is our lab password. And then we'll click enter to continue. So here in the system customization, if we want to enable the shell for this ESXi host and or enable SSH access to this host, we'd use the down arrow key and go down to troubleshooting options. And with troubleshooting options selected, we'll press enter. And then right here, we just press enter to enable ESXi Shell. So at the moment, it's disabled. If we press enter with ESXi Shell highlighted, it'll change it to enabled. So let's go ahead and do that with the press of the enter key. And it's done. So now it's showing that on ESXi2, the shell is enabled. And if we wanted to disable it, the top option now shows disable ESXi Shell. So we're going to leave it enabled. And the question might be, well, Keith, now that we enabled the ESXi Shell, how do we get to it? And here is the answer to that question. We're going to use the keyboard combination of Alt F1. So hold on the Alt key, press F1, and that takes us to the console of this ESXi host, where we could log on as root, supply our lab password, and then we'd have the command line interface. Now, if we had not enabled the shell, effectively we would see this, but it would never make it to the point where it offered us a login prompt. So we'll go ahead and log on as root. Press enter, supply our lab password, press enter, and ta-da, we're here. So we can do ls, we can do a pwd, we can change folders, and all that other fun Linux stuff. And we can also from here issue our ESX CLI commands. For example, ESX CLI, just by itself and press enter, it's going to give us some help regarding the options available with this command. So we typed it in here, it's giving us the format for the commands, including the options and available namespaces. So from here, if we typed in the command exit, EXIT, and pressed enter, we're still in the shell. It's just asking us to log in again. So if we want to get out of this, then what we got here was Alt F1, and to get out of the shell back to the DCUI, we'd use Alt F2. So let's do an Alt F2 right now, and that takes us back to our DCUI interface. So coming back to the spot that we left, let's also enable SSH by pressing enter. And that will enable SSH, and then we'll hit escape a couple of times to go ahead and log out. So now we should be able to connect to this ESXi host via an SSH client. So let's go back to our Windows management computer. So on our management computer, DCNUG, over here on the left of the desktop, I've got a shortcut for PuTTY, which is a great little terminal emulator. So we'll go ahead and double click on PuTTY. And then I've got entries already for the host. So for example, if we click on ESXi2 and click on load, we can verify the IP address that we're connecting to, which is the management IP for ESXi2. We're going to be connecting on port 22, which is the default port for SSH. So let's go ahead and click open, and that will open an SSH session over to ESXi2. Let's maximize that window as well, and then let's log in as root. We'll supply our lab password, press enter, and once again we have CLI access, but this time we have it via SSH. So let me do a clear to give us a little more room, and let's issue the command ESXi space and the namespace of software and press enter. So regarding software, we can identify where the VIBs are, and VIB is an acronym for vSphere Installation Bundle. We can install, update, remove, or display individual VIB packages. So if we want to push that envelope further, we use the up arrow key, and that brings back our previous command. And we can just add on top of that, for example, VIB, and press enter. And now it's showing us all the options that we have that could follow that. So an ESXi software VIB followed by a list would list all the installed VIB packages on this ESXi host. So if we press the up arrow key, do a space, and add the command list and press enter, now it's going to give us a list of every VIB that's currently on this ESXi host. And it's a boatload. That list goes on for quite a while. So if we had some updates that we need to apply, and we put them in an update.zip file, the ESXi software VIB update command, the -d refers to the depot, the storage location for the update, and then update.zip if that's our file name. So we can actually apply updates to this host using ESXi. So if we press enter here with this command, it's complaining a little bit about this update.zip. It said, hey, I checked out this depot at /var log VMware, and I didn't see your update.zip or anything that described it. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that update.zip because I can't find it. And so to solve that, we could do two things. Number one is have a file called update.zip and make sure it's sitting in the right location so it can actually be applied. And let's say we did an update, and we updated, let's say, for example, 4 or 5 different VIBs, but they weren't going to be active until we rebooted the ESXi host. We could use the command, I'm going to use the up arrow key a couple of times, ESXi software VIB list space, and then we could do a -- rebooting -image. So that would show us the VIBs that aren't currently running now, but that would be once we reboot the ESXi host. So if we press enter, because we didn't apply any new VIBs, it's not giving us a list of any new VIBs that's currently not already running. Let's go and do a clear command, and let's take a look at a few more. How about ESXi space network regarding networking? So if we just put that in and press enter, it gives us the available options that can follow that. One of them is right here, NIC. So if we press the up arrow key to bring back the last command, and then add a space, and typed in NIC space, and then list, it'll give us a list of all the VM NICs that we have. Those are our uplinks from this ESXi host out to the external network. So if we press enter here, we currently have 7 VM NICs, which are VM NIC 0 through 6. And it also gives us their current status, which says they're up. And here's their respective MAC addresses as well. Another great option is the ESXi network VM list. If we press enter there, it's currently showing us no VMs because I don't have any VMs running on ESXi2. Let's fix that. Let's go ahead and minimize this SSH session. And let's go ahead and double click the vSphere web client shortcut here on the desktop. And then we'll log on as administrator at nuggetlab.com using our lab password, and we'll click login. So while this loads up, our intention is to launch at least one VM on ESXi2 so that it will show up once we issue that ESXi command again after the VM is running. Alright, so probably the fastest way to find out which VMs are running on ESXi2 is just to click on ESXi2 over on the left, and then on the tabs, we'll go ahead and click VMs. Alright, so we have these VMs that are currently associated with ESXi2. Let's go ahead and click on the row for VM2, so it's selected, it's highlighted, and then let's go ahead and start that VM. We'll give that a moment to initialize. I'll go ahead and minimize the vSphere web client. Let's go back to our SSH session, and now let's hit the up arrow key and do this command again. We should see VM2. We should see VM2 once it's powered on. Maybe I was a little bit too fast. So we'll hit the up arrow key, press enter, and it is not showing up. Woohoo! Let's troubleshoot. Going back to the vSphere web client, clicking on VM2, and with VM2 selected, it got placed on ESXi 3. So thank you DRS for making that decision for us. So we'll go ahead and we'll migrate them over to ESXi 2. So we'll right click on VM2. From the menu, click on Migrate. We'll specify we only want to change the compute resource. Click on Next. We specifically want ESXi 2, so we'll select ESXi 2, click Next. We'll leave the networking the same for the VM, click Next. And high priority is great, Next. And Finish. So in a moment, under Related Objects, here we go. Now it should show ESXi 2, which is fantastic. So now, if we go back to our SSH session and hit the up arrow key, it should now show us VM2, which is currently running on ESXi 2. Let's do a clear, and let's do a few more. So the command ESX CLI space network space vSwitch, that will show us our two options. We have DVS, that's distributed virtual switch, and standard for the standard virtual switch. So if we hit the up arrow key again, and we type in standard, and then specify a list, meaning we want to see a list of all of our standard switches, if we press enter, that's exactly what it'll give us. So here we have vSwitch 3. It has an MTU of 1500. It's listening for Cisco Discovery Protocol messages. The two uplinks that are supporting it are VMNIC 4 and VMNIC 6. And the VM kernel port associated with this switch is VMK-vMotion. And then since then, we've loaded it up with fault tolerance and SAN. So vSwitch 3 is a very busy switch. And if we want to do our older commands, we could do those as well. So here's an example of an older command. We have the ESXCFG -vSwitch space -L. That lowercase l represents list. So if we pressed enter, that would also give us our switch information. So for example, here we have switch 3 again, including the MTU of 1500, and which uplinks are supporting it. So going back to the newer ESX CLI command, if we wanted to look at the network information regarding distributed virtual switches, we could use this option with the list at the very end, press enter, and that's showing us information regarding our virtual switches, including things like the MTU, the ports configured, and the uplinks involved. And again, for the options that exist, just put in part of the command, press enter, and it's going to give you help along the way. So if we had made some changes through a script and we want to make sure those changes were reflected inside of the vSphere web client, we could use the command ESXCLI network firewall refresh. And again, if we're not sure, we can just put the commands up to the point that we know and press enter, and that shows us the additional options. So the refresh simply takes the rule set that's configured for the firewall function of the ESXi host and applies it. So there's a couple more examples, and I'd like you to practice these in the hands-on lab as well. Another option is ESX CLI storage, and there's just, again, a ton of commands under each of these. So if we hit the up arrow and did an ESX CLI storage space, and let's type in core for our VMware core storage commands. And let's do a device list and press enter. That should show us all of our storage devices that ESXi 2 knows about. And if we scroll up a little bit in this output, if we were to look at ESXi 2 and look at its configuration in the GUI regarding host bus adapter 65 that it's using for iSCSI, this identifier right here represents our iSCSI network-based storage appliance with LUN1 being represented. So a few key elements here. Status is on. That's a good thing. So the ESXi host is able to use this. The multipath plugin is NMP, which is the native multipath plugin. And VMware uses something called the pluggable storage architecture. And the intent is that if a third-party vendor, for example, a storage provider, has some amazing way of communicating back and forth with an ESXi host, that vendor can bring their own multipath plugin, for example. It can be incorporated on our ESXi hosts, and then the ESXi host can leverage the benefits of the storage provider. Another big factor, since we're talking about storage for a moment, another big factor is VAAI, which stands for vStorage APIs for Array Integration. So there's our acronym, VAAI. And one of the benefits of having a really good hook for storage that can be used is that the ESXi host, instead of having to do everything in software, it can actually offload commands to a storage provider using VAAI so that the storage provider can do some of that work. For example, if we're going to do copying of files within the data store, instead of having the ESXi host read them all in and then write them all back, using VAAI and having a storage provider that both understands and supports some of the advanced features, the actual storage provider, taking the command from the ESXi host, could go ahead and do that rewrite of the data so that the ESXi host itself doesn't manually have to do every single block. Now, this NMP, the native multipath plugin, actually supports two sub-plugins as well. One is the storage array type of plugin, which is abbreviated as SATP for storage array type plugin, and the other plugin subtype is called a PSP, which stands for a path selection plugin. And again, the beauty is if you're a vendor, you can write your own plugins, have them incorporated, and that way the ESXi host can leverage and take advantage of any advanced features that the storage provider is bringing. And if we wanted to get a list of core plugins regarding storage, and then if we wanted to filter the output so it's only showing us the storage plugins in the class of MP for multipath, we could use this command, ESXi storage core plugin list space dash dash plugin dash class, and then uppercase MP and press enter. So here it's showing us our plugin name, which is the NMP. That's the native multipath plugin, and that's in the plugin class of multipath. And then one more thing I want to share with you. This is pretty fun. Let's imagine you're SSH'd in and you want the DCUI look and feel. What we can do is we can type in DCUI. Right here from an SSH session, press enter, and it brings up the DCUI for us. So it's not the bumblebee colored. That may be due to my terminal emulator not pulling it in. But we'll press F2. We'll hit the down arrow key, supply our lab password, and this is a way to have the DCUI look and feel courtesy of an existing SSH session. So if you're done with the session, you can just close the window, confirm, and if we were to go back to the vSphere web client just for a moment and click on ESXi2 on the left, and then with the configure tab selected for ESXi2, if we scroll down a little bit, under system there's an option for security profile. If we click on security profile right here, so ESXi2, configure, and security profile, on the right hand side, if we scroll down a little bit and we get here to services, you'll notice that the ESXi Shell is currently running. We enabled that from the DCUI, and SSH as a service is also running. And if we were to compare and contrast that, for example, over to ESXi3, let's do that by simply clicking on the left hand side on ESXi3. And we'll notice the default condition regarding SSH in the shell, and that is it's disabled. So here on ESXi3, where it's not enabled yet, we have the ESXi shell and SSH both stopped. So if we wanted to enable those here, we could do that. So here in services, if we click on edit, and then regarding ESXi shell, we could go ahead and simply click on start to start it, which I'm going to go ahead and do. And also regarding service details, I'm going to specify that we want to start and stop this with the host. And then for SSH, we'll go ahead and click that, start it as well, expand the details, and we're also going to start and stop with the host regarding SSH. So it's available when the host boots up. And then we'll click on OK. And since we're right here, let's also enable that for ESXi1. So we'll be able to SSH to any of them should we need to. So here with ESXi1 selected on configure and under system, selecting security profile, across from services, we'll click on edit. We'll click on ESXi shell, click on start, expand the service details, tell it to start and stop with the host, and then we'll go to SSH, start that, expand the details, and specify start and stop. Click on OK, and then we can confirm that the ESXi shell and SSH are running and available on each of our 3 ESXi hosts. So now, my friend, it is your turn to practice enabling and working with the direct console user interface and also SSHing over to our ESXi hosts. And I'd like you to take some time and practice with each of the ESX CLI commands that we demonstrated in this nugget. And then above and beyond that, feel free to practice or play around as much as you'd like. Because the hands-on lab is a safe place that's not going to ruin anybody's production environment. So that's a great place to learn and play. So have some fun with the lab, and I'll see you in the next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.